Have you ever stopped to listen to your suffering, not to analyze it, medicate it, or silence it, but to hear it as if it were a messenger? Modern society has declared war on our pains. Anxiety is a chemical disorder, depression, a circuit failure, existential emptiness, a symptom to be suppressed. But what if I told you that this pain, this neurosis that haunts you in the silence of the early morning, is not a disease? What if it is, in fact, a form of health? The health of a soul that refuses to live a life that is not its own. Carl Jung, the great explorer of the psyche's depths, dared to affirm something that our quick-fix culture fears to admit. Neurosis is, almost always, a substitute for legitimate suffering. It is the cry of protest from a soul imprisoned in a superficial life, a violent and desperate call for a journey of return to oneself. Your symptom is not the problem. It is the finger that points to the real wound. Your depression may be a sacred nostalgia for an inner home you have abandoned. Your anxiety, the energy of a transformation you refuse to begin. This is the most curious and terrifying part of your journey, what you fear most. The monster that inhabits your inner labyrinth guards the treasure you most seek. The path to healing is not to circumvent the darkness, but to cross through it. It is not to kill the dragon, but to integrate it. Your pain is not a sign that you are broken. It is an invitation, a call to the greatest of all adventures, individuation. The spiritual journey to become who you truly are. If these words resonate in the silent abyss within you, if they strike a chord that has not vibrated for a long time, understand that you did not arrive at this video by chance. This is an act of synchronicity, an invitation from your own unconscious. To proceed, a commitment is necessary. Subscribe to this channel to join a brotherhood of soul explorers, those who dare to look within. Leave your like as a sign, a symbolic yes to your own inner calling, and comment with the single word that describes the feeling that brought you here. This is your first step off the edge. The journey begins now. 21st century man lives in a tortuous paradox. He is drowned in information, but dying of thirst for wisdom. We have built an empire of technology and material comfort, but upon it, we have erected an inner landscape of desolation. This phenomenon, which we call emptiness, anxiety, or depression, is not an accident. It is a direct and inevitable symptom of a condition that Jung diagnosed with surgical precision. The loss of myths. For millennia, humanity lived sheltered under the roof of great cosmic narratives. Religions, mythologies, and rituals provided a map for the psyche, a place for every suffering, and a meaning for existence, from birth to death. These structures were not mere superstitions, they were technologies of the soul. Psychic containers that protected the fragile ego from the overwhelming and chaotic experience of the infinite. With the advent of the Enlightenment and the rise of rationalism, we proudly declared that we had killed God, but we did not realize that, in doing so, we also demolished our own inner home. Expelled from the symbolic garden, we found ourselves naked and alone, exposed to a universe that science described as cold, mute, and indifferent. The soul, however, cannot bear a vacuum. It has an innate hunger for meaning, a religious impulse as fundamental as the hunger for bread. When this energy, once channeled to the heavens, no longer finds its sacred vessel, it does not disappear. It spills, uncontrolled, over the profane world. The man who loses his gods does not start believing in nothing. He starts believing in anything. He projects his need for transcendence onto secular idols, the state, money, success, political ideology, the cult of the body, or even science itself turned into dogma. He seeks salvation in the next gadget, the next promotion, the next relationship that promises to fulfill him. But all these substitutes are empty foods. They may distract the hunger for a time, but they never nourish the soul. And it is from this abyss between the soul's hunger and the diet of superficialities we offer it that modern neurosis is born. It is the feverish symptom of spiritual starvation. Your feeling that something is missing is not an illusion. It is the most lucid perception you can have. It is your soul, starving, beating against the bars of the golden cage you have built, begging you to remember the language of symbols, dreams, and mystery. The journey of individuation begins here, in the honest and brutal recognition of your own hunger. It is necessary to admit the bankruptcy of the external world as a source of meaning. in order to then have the courage to begin the archaeological excavation in the only place where the true treasure can be found, within yourself. To understand Jung's view on spirituality, it is crucial to make a distinction that the modern world insists on ignoring: the abysmal difference between religion and religiosity. Religion, as an institution, is the creed, the collective system of beliefs, rituals, and dogmas. It functions as a vessel, a structure created to contain and transmit the experience of the sacred across generations. At its best, it offers a path, a community, and a symbolic language that protects the psyche. However, like every human creation, it is subject to sclerosis, to decay. Dogma, which was once the living expression of a revelation, can become a petrified truth, an empty shell. Ritual, once an act of deep connection, can turn into mechanical repetition. The institution, which should serve as a bridge to the divine, can become a wall, imprisoning its followers in a childish mentality of blind obedience and fear. This is the cage of dogma. It offers security in exchange for sovereignty. It gives you ready-made answers so that you never have to face the anguish of your own questions. It sells you an external God, a judge or a father in heaven, so that you never have to find the divine center that dwells in your own psyche. On the other hand, religiosity, or, as Jung preferred, the experience of the numinous, is the raw material. It is the direct, personal, and overwhelming encounter with a reality that transcends the ego. It is not something one believes in. It is something one knows through direct experience. It can happen in a dream, in a moment of deep introspection, before a sublime work of art, or in the midst of wild nature. It is a moment of awe and fascination, which shakes the foundations of our worldview and connects us to something vastly greater than ourselves. For Jung, this experience is the core of all authentic spirituality. A truly spiritual person is not one who blindly follows a creed, but one who pays careful attention to their inner life, who seeks a living relationship with the forces of the unconscious. That is why Jung stated, "I do not believe, I know." He was referring to this knowledge born from experience, a certainty that no intellectual doubt can shake. The spiritual journey, therefore, is not about choosing the right religion. It is about having the courage to cultivate one's own religiosity. It is using the symbolic language of religions, the myths of Christ, Buddha, Krishna, not as literal historical facts, but as maps of the human soul's journey towards wholeness. It is realizing that the story of the crucifixion and resurrection is not just something that happened to one man 2,000 years ago, but a psychological process that needs to happen within each of us, the death of the false self, the inflated ego, so that the self, our true and divine self, can be born. Spiritual freedom, then, is the ability to drink the wine of direct experience, using the vessels of tradition as guides, but without ever becoming a prisoner to them. At the center of the vast and unknown continent of the psyche, there is a point that is, at the same time, the center and the totality. Jung called it the self. This is not the I we know, our conscious ego, which worries about paying bills and the opinions of others. The ego is merely the center of consciousness, a small island in the vast ocean of the unconscious. The self, on the other hand, is the ordering center of the entire psyche. Both conscious and unconscious, it is the totality of our personality, our fullest potential, the image of God imprinted on our soul. If the ego is the captain who believes he governs the ship, the self is the entire ocean, with its hidden currents, its tides, and its immeasurable power, which truly determines the course of the voyage. The journey of individuation, in its essence, is the process of shifting the center of gravity of our personality. It is the heroic transition from a life governed by the ego to a life lived in service and in dialogue with the self. In the first half of life, it is natural and necessary for the ego to strengthen itself, to separate from the unconscious matrix in order to function in the world. But in the second half of life, the task is the reverse. The ego must recognize that it is not the master in its own house. It must bow to a higher, inner authority. This surrender is not a defeat, but the greatest of victories. It is the discovery that we are not alone, that there is a greater intelligence, an inner compass that guides us if we learn to listen to it. The self communicates with us not through logic, but through the language of symbols, which come to us in dreams, fantasies, synchronicities, and intuitions. When a dream disturbs us, when a significant coincidence gives us chills, when an image obsesses us for no apparent reason, it is the self knocking on the door of consciousness, trying to correct us, to guide us, to show us the way to our fullness. It is the director of the play that is our life, and the ego is just the main actor. When the actor forgets that there is a director and tries to rewrite the script alone, the result is neurosis, conflict, a loss of meaning. Life becomes a sterile and exhausting struggle. But when the ego learns to collaborate with the self, life transforms into a work of art, a dance. The difficulties do not disappear, but they acquire a new meaning. Suffering becomes a rite of passage. Challenges, opportunities for growth. Finding the self is not a single event, but a continuous process of listening and alignment. It is the alchemical work of a lifetime. It is the realization that the kingdom of heaven, of which the mystics spoke, is not a place we go to after death, but a dimension of the psyche to be discovered here and now. It is the discovery of the God within, not as a narcissistic fantasy of the ego, but as the humble and reverent acceptance that we are part of something infinitely greater and wiser than our small conscious mind can conceive. The word individuation may sound complex, but its meaning is, at the same time, simple and terrifying. To become an individual, that is, someone undivided, whole, one with oneself. It is the process of becoming who you were destined to be from the beginning, of realizing your unique and unrepeatable essence. However, the central paradox of this journey is that, to become truly connected with humanity and the cosmos, you must first tread a path of profound and, at times, painful solitude. Society, by its very nature, pressures us to conform. From birth, we are shaped by family, school, culture, religion. We learn to wear masks, the persona, as Jung called it, to be accepted, loved, and successful. The persona is a necessary interface for social life, but the mortal danger is when we identify completely with it. When the actor forgets he is wearing a mask and believes he is the role he plays. Individuation is the process of de-identification. It is the courage to begin questioning everything you have taken as yours, your beliefs, your values, your ambitions. It is a slow and painful shedding of the false skins that the collective has imposed on you. And this, inevitably, generates conflict. When you begin to follow your internal compass, the voice of the self, your choices may seem strange, illogical, or even dangerous to those who still live by the rules of the collective. They may call you selfish, crazy, a dreamer. This is the price of authenticity. It is the solitude of the hero who leaves the safe village to venture into the haunted forest in search of the treasure that will save everyone. The solitude is not that of social isolation or bitterness, but the sacred solitude of the pioneer. It is the understanding that your path is yours alone. No one can give you a detailed map. Gurus, books, masters can point directions, offer tools, but the walk, the crossing of the deserts and swamps of your own psyche, only you can do. It is in this silence, far from the noise of others' opinions, that you begin to hear the subtle voices of your unconscious. Your dreams become more vivid, synchronicities more frequent. Individuation is less about doing and more about allowing the unique pattern of your soul to unfold, like a seed that already contains within it the image of the entire tree. It is a path of faith, not in an external God, but in the immanent wisdom of your own psyche. It is trusting that, even in moments of greatest darkness and confusion, when you feel completely lost, there is a greater force at work, guiding you towards your totality. The final goal is not to become a perfect and flawless being, but a complete human being, who integrates their light and their shadows, their masculine and their feminine, their conscious and their unconscious. It is to return to the world, not as a conformist or a reactive rebel, but as an authentic individual, capable of contributing to the world from your deepest truth. The human psyche is not a blank slate. We are born with an innate structure, a psychic hardware that has been shaped by millions of years of human experience. Jung called these primordial structures archetypes. They are like empty riverbeds in the psyche, universal patterns that are filled with the content of our personal experience. They populate our myths, fairy tales, and, most importantly, our dreams. They are the gods and demons that live within us. On the journey of individuation, 3 of these archetypes play a crucial role as guides and antagonists: the shadow, the anima in a man, and the animus in a woman. The shadow is our other self, our dark twin brother. It contains everything that we have repressed and denied in ourselves to be acceptable to society and to our own ego. In it reside our most primitive instincts, our negative emotions, anger, envy, greed, and our unlived potentials. The first step of the spiritual journey is the confrontation with the shadow. It is to stop projecting it onto others, the annoying neighbor, the corrupt politician, the social group we hate, and to recognize that everything that irritates and offends us in the external world exists, in some way, within us. This is a humbling and painful work, the dark night of the soul. But the shadow is not purely evil. Within it also hides immense vitality, spontaneous creativity, and an authenticity that we lost while trying to be good. Integrating the shadow does not mean giving in to our darkest impulses, but bringing them into the light of consciousness, dialoguing with them, and extracting the gold they contain. Next, we encounter the anima and the animus. The anima is the inner image of the feminine in a man's psyche, his soul image. She is the bearer of connection, intuition, creativity, and the capacity to relate. A man who is not in touch with his anima is rigid, overly rational, emotionally distant, and projects his soul onto real women, seeking in them the salvation and wholeness that he can only find within himself. The animus is the counterpart, the inner image of the masculine in a woman's psyche. He represents focus, logic, assertiveness, and the power of discrimination. A woman disconnected from her animus can be passive, have difficulty expressing her opinions, and project him onto authoritarian men, seeking in them the direction she lacks. The work with the animus is a sacred inner marriage, the coniunctio of the alchemists. For the man, it is learning to feel, to connect, to value the relational. For the woman, it is learning to think clearly, to act in the world with purpose, to own her own authority. These figures are not mere concepts, but living presences that appear in our dreams as guides, lovers, seducers, or enemies. To dialogue with them is to learn to relate to the other sex, not from need and projection, but from wholeness. It is the path to becoming psychologically androgynous, complete in oneself. In our world governed by the logic of cause and effect, we tend to dismiss coincidences as mere statistical chances. However, there are moments when a coincidence presents itself with such an intense charge of meaning that it shakes us profoundly, leaving the feeling that a hidden intelligence is at work. You think of a friend you haven't seen in years, and 5 minutes later, he calls you. You are struggling with a deep question and, by chance, open a book to a page that contains the exact answer. You see an animal or a symbol repeating in your life in an inexplicable way. At a time of crisis or transition, Jung coined a term for these events, synchronicity, which he defined as a causal connecting principle. It is the meaningful union between an inner psychic event, a thought, a dream, a feeling, and an outer physical event, which do not have a cause and effect relationship, but a relationship of meaning. Synchronicity is a glimpse behind the curtain of everyday reality. It is a moment when the inner world and the outer world mirror each other, revealing that they are not separate as we think. They are two faces of the same reality, the unused mundus one world of the alchemists, a background where psyche and matter are one and the same. These events are not tricks of the universe to entertain us. They are messages. They are the language through which the self, the ordering center of the psyche, communicates with us, using the very fabric of the world as its notice board. Synchronicity tends to occur at crucial moments in our individuation journey, during major crises, life changes, or when we are deeply engaged in inner work, such as therapy or the exploration of dreams. It functions as a confirmation. When we are on the right path, aligned with the purpose of the self, the universe seems to conspire in our favor, opening doors, bringing the right people, providing the information we need. On the other hand, it can also function as a warning, a sign that we are going in the wrong direction. Paying attention to synchronicity is to develop a new form of perception, a sensitivity to the patterns of meaning that unfold in our lives. It is to step out of the narrow mindset of the ego, which only believes in what it can control and measure, and to adopt a posture of humility and wonder before the mystery of existence. It requires that we cultivate inner silence so that we can perceive the subtle correspondences. It is like learning a new language, a language that is not made of words, but of symbols, images, and events. By doing so, life ceases to be a random succession of events and reveals itself as a continuous and meaningful dialogue between our soul and the universe. Each day becomes a treasure hunt, a search for the golden threads of meaning that connect all things. Synchronicity is the experimental proof that we are not alone and that our inner journey has a cosmic resonance. Every night, as we fall asleep, we dive into a universe as vast and real as the world we inhabit during the day. However, our rationalist culture has taught us to devalue this experience, to treat dreams as psychic garbage, a mere random byproduct of neural activity. For Jung, this attitude is one of the greatest and most tragic losses of the modern soul. He saw dreams not as meaningless events, but as the purest and most unadulterated manifestation of the unconscious. They are the voice of nature within us, a primordial intelligence that tries, night after night, to communicate with our conscious ego. The dream is a letter, sealed and addressed to us, sent from the deepest center of our being, the self. If we ignore this correspondence, we are deliberately cutting ourselves off from the most intimate and reliable source of wisdom we possess. The main function of the dream is compensation. The unconscious perceives the imbalances and one-sidedness of our conscious attitude and tries to correct them through the dream narrative. If our ego is too arrogant and inflated, the dream may show us in a humiliating situation, falling or being ridiculed. If we are too shy and fearful in waking life, the dream may present us with a heroic image of ourselves fighting a monster. The dream is not lying, it is showing the other side, the part of our psychic reality that we are ignoring. It seeks to restore balance and guide us towards wholeness. To understand the language of dreams, we need to abandon linear logic and literal thinking. Dreams speak the archaic language of humanity, the language of symbols and metaphors. A car in a dream is rarely just a car. It can symbolize the way we are driving our life. A house can represent our own psyche, with its different floors and hidden basements. A pursuer can be an image of our own shadow, a part of ourselves that we are trying to avoid, but that needs to be confronted. The work with dreams is, therefore, a work of translation, of amplification. It is not about looking for a fixed meaning in a dream dictionary, but about entering into a dialogue with the images. What does this image mean to me? What emotions does it evoke? Where in my conscious life do I feel the same emotion? By honoring our dreams, writing them down, reflecting on them, painting them, or simply carrying their images with us during the day, we open a vital channel of communication with the self. They become our inner oracle, our most reliable guide on the journey of individuation. They show us our wounds, our unrealized potentials, our next steps. In a world that teaches us to seek all answers on the outside, the dream insistently reminds us that the most accurate compass, the truest map, already resides within us, waiting patiently to be consulted in the silence of the night. Of all the gateways on the journey of individuation, none is as feared and as necessary as the confrontation with the shadow. The shadow is the archetype of our lower self, the repository of everything we consider unacceptable in ourselves. It is our greed, our anger, our lust, our laziness, our fragility, everything that has been banished from the living room of consciousness and chained in the basement of the psyche. We spend the first half of our lives building an idealized persona, an image of ourselves as good, moral, and controlled people. And we spend a colossal amount of psychic energy keeping the door to that basement locked. The problem is that what we repress does not disappear. On the contrary, it becomes autonomous and dangerous. And above all, we project it. Projection is the unconscious mechanism by which we see our own dark qualities in others. The politician we hate with a disproportionate fury, the co-worker who deeply irritates us, the social group we despise, they become the blank screens where we project our own unrecognized psychic garbage. The intensity of our emotional reaction to something or someone is the surest clue that a projection of the shadow is at play. The spiritual journey requires, as its first and most difficult step, the withdrawal of these projections. It is the painful and humiliating work of looking at what we hate in the world and asking, where does this live in me? This is the beginning of the dark night of the soul. The descent into the underworld, the Nikia of the Greeks, is a process that dissolves our self-deception and forces us to face the totality of who we are, not just the part we like to show. Why is this so crucial? First, for ethical reasons. As long as we do not recognize our own capacity for evil, we are extremely dangerous. It is the people who consider themselves pure and masters of the truth who commit the greatest atrocities in the name of good. Integrating the shadow makes us more humble, more compassionate, and less prone to judging others. Second, because the shadow contains a treasure. By repressing our negative qualities, we also repress their vital energy. In the shadow hides our strength, our wild creativity, our healthiest instincts. The gold is always guarded by the dragon. By confronting the dragon of the shadow, not to kill it, but to understand and integrate it, we recover lost parts of ourselves. Our anger, when made conscious, can become a force for justice. Our ambition, a force for accomplishment. Our sensuality, a force for deep connection. Integrating the shadow does not mean becoming evil, but becoming whole. It is being able to look at one's own darkness without identifying with it, but also without denying it. It is an act of radical courage that frees us from hypocrisy and anchors us in the reality of what it means to be human. It is the step that transforms a naive idealist into a conscious and truly powerful individual. The ancient alchemists, in their dusty laboratories, were not just trying to turn literal lead into literal gold. Jung realized that the bizarre and symbolic language of their texts was, in fact, a projection of a profound psychological process, the transformation of the psyche. Alchemy, for him, was the historical model of the individuation journey. Each stage of the alchemical process is a metaphor for a stage of our inner transformation. The work begins with the prima materia, the raw material. Psychologically, this is our initial chaotic and unconscious condition. It is our pain, our neurosis, our suffering, our most problematic complex. It is the lead of our existence. Where modern psychology tries to eliminate this symptom, the alchemist sees it as the most precious substance, the essential starting point for the great work. The process unfolds in phases, whose names are deeply symbolic. The nigredo, or the blackening, is the first and most difficult. It corresponds to the confrontation with the shadow. The dissolution of the ego, the dark night of the soul. It is a state of depression, confusion, and despair, where all our old certainties are burned in the fire of suffering, calcinatio. It is the moment when we need to stew in our own juices, resisting the temptation to flee from the pain, for it is in it that the transformation begins. Next comes the albedo, or the whitening. After the darkness of the nigredo, a new light emerges. It is the result of the dialogue with the unconscious, especially with the figures of the anima, animus. Consciousness is purified. We begin to see things more clearly, to differentiate ourselves from our projections and emotions. It is a state of illumination, of peace, and of introspection. However, the work is not yet complete. The light of the albedo can be cold and distant, a lucidity without passion. The third phase is the citronitis, or the yellowing. It is the sunrise, the arrival of wisdom. The knowledge acquired in the albedo is now warmed by the heart, transforming into understanding and compassion. It is the phase in which the inner philosopher is born, capable of seeing the meaning behind life's events. Finally, we reach the rubedo, the reddening. This is the final phase, the creation of the philosopher's stone, which symbolizes the self. It is the moment when the conscious and the unconscious, spirit and matter, the divine and the human, are united in a sacred marriage coniunctio. The individual has not gotten rid of their problems, but is now able to live their life with passion, purpose, and wholeness. They have become the gold, not because they are perfect, but because they are capable of containing the opposites within themselves. This alchemical model teaches us the most profound lesson of Jungian spirituality. Suffering is not an obstacle on the path, it is the path. Our wounds, our fears, our failures are not garbage to be discarded, but the very raw material that, if subjected to the fire of consciousness and the patience of the heart, can be transmuted into the gold of our immortal soul. At the end of the journey, after having crossed the darkness of the shadow, dialogued with the archetypal guides, and transmuted the lead of suffering, the individual arrives at a fundamental realization. Life is not something that happens to them, but something that happens through them. Individuation does not culminate in a state of passive happiness or disembodied enlightenment, but in a call to action. It is the discovery and acceptance of one's own unique mission in the world. What the writer Paulo Coelho, inspired by Jung, popularized as the personal legend. This mission is not necessarily something grand or famous in the eyes of the world. It may not be writing a great novel or leading a nation. It could be the task of being a conscious parent, a dedicated artisan, a silent healer, a teacher who ignites the flame in their students. The what of the mission is less important than the how. To live your own legend means to live whatever your life may be from the center of your being, the self, and not from the demands of the ego or the expectations of society. It is to bring your deepest truth into every act, every word, every relationship. It is to transform your life into a ritual, into a work of art that expresses your unique soul. This requires continuous courage. It is the courage to say no to what is not aligned with your essence, even if it means losing status, security, or approval. It is the courage to follow the calls of your intuition, even when they seem illogical or frightening. It is the faith that, in serving the self, the universe will provide what is necessary. A principle that Jung called the transcendent function. The transcendent function is the reconciling force that emerges when we hold the tension between opposites, between the conscious and the unconscious, between what the ego wants and what the soul needs. When we do not choose a side prematurely, but endure the conflict, a third way, a creative and unexpected solution emerges. This is how the self guides us. To live one's own legend is, therefore, the highest form of spiritual service. By becoming who you truly are, you are not just healing yourself. You are contributing to the healing of the world. An individual who lives from their center radiates a quality of presence and authenticity that affects everyone around them. They become a point of light in the darkness of the collective unconscious. They do not need to preach or convert anyone. Their own life becomes the message. This is the final responsibility that the journey of individuation imposes on us. We are not called to escape the world, but to fully embody our soul within it. Each of us is born with a unique musical note to play in the great symphony of the cosmos. Our neurotic suffering comes from the refusal to play that note, from the attempt to imitate the notes of others. Our salvation, our only and true spiritual mission, is to find our note and to play it with all the strength, beauty, and truth we possess until our last breath.